Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm so excited to see so many of you here this evening. As you already know, we have a fantastic alumni panel with us, ready to share their experiences and give us the inside scoop on careers that impact climate and energy. I'm Des Rathall, the Director of Alumni Relations for CEOs, and I'm part of the Alumni Association as well. My favorite part of my job is creating opportunities to connect alumni with current students and with each other, and I'm so glad you could all join us here tonight. Many of you already know my co-host and our moderator this evening, the amazing Britt Hoskins, and I'll turn the time over to her now to introduce herself and our alumni panel.
Okay. So my name is Britt Hoskins. I am a career advisor serving the colleges of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences, which is where all our panelists are from, but also the colleges of Agricultural Sciences and Forestry as well. But I just want to extend a welcome to all of you who are in any major who might be interested in this topic. This is really for everybody at OSU. So a few notes here. I'll make sure to share this recording after the fact if you want to go back and see the answer to a question. So anybody that attended here or registered, I'll send it to. I know that some of you submitted some existing questions, or you submitted some previous questions through the registration portal. And if you're interested in still having those be answered, just submit those to the chat. I think we have a big room, so we'll just go in an order, first come, first served kind of question order. Reminder to the panelists, we have a lot of students. We want to get through a lot of questions. So on average, we'll aim for 1 to 2 panelists to answer a question. So don't feel like everybody has to answer every question, but feel free to just take yourself off mute and jump in whatever way makes sense. And for the most part, we'll use the chat for questions for students, but if you really want to take yourself off mute and ask a question that way, that's totally fine too. And then one other thing I wanted to mention is we have a new alumni database, which is really neat, called OSU Connections. So this is a way that students and alumni can connect on their own. So I encourage both students and alumni to sign up for that. And you can mark if you're alumni, if you're willing to meet with people and how you can help. So that's a new resource that was just launched last year. So it's just good to know about OSU Connections. When you're on your way to graduate, sign up for that so you can stay connected with things like this. And then finally, we will share the panelist contact information afterward. If we don't get to it, or if you wanted to follow up with one of the panelists directly, we will send out email addresses for the panelists. So you will have more direct contact with them that way. So let's get started. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. I'm going to start with 2 introductory questions, and then we're going to move to all of your questions that you have saved up. So the first question is very basic. Just introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your job. Let's start with Zach.
Cool. My name starts with a Z. I'm not used to going first. My name is Zach Pinard. Right now I'm working remotely for an environmental group called Clean and Prosperous Washington. We were a group that passed the Climate Commitment Act in Washington last session, and so that was a major legislative victory for us, but now we're ensuring that the program that it launches is implemented effectively. And so right now what I'm doing for the group as a research associate is I'm looking into different transportation alternatives, how to reduce carbon emissions from the transportation sector in Washington. So that's a very general overview of what I'm up to right now.
That's perfect. Thank you. Okay, let's do April.
Hello, everybody. I am April, and so I guess I'll start with I graduated Oregon State in 2020, so in the midst of the pandemic, yay! But in that crazy time, I actually was able to obtain a remote position through Weatherflow. And so right now I am doing mesoscale meteorology wind forecasts for the Columbia River Gorge and Puget Sound. And so you might be thinking, well, what does this have to do with climate? Well, the changing climate is ultimately resulting in a lot of meteorological changes that we're observing. And so I'm actually like their climate expertise on their team, which I think is kind of cool. And especially for an introductory job, like to have that, like, I guess, unofficial title is really, really nice and honorable. So I will take it. So I help them a lot with understanding how a warming climate is actually impacting different wind patterns in the gorge and how this can affect kite surfers, because a lot of kite surfers and kite surfing companies go on ahead and use our weather reports. So yeah, aside from that, I'm also doing a climate science web series that I'm just launching this year, just kind of talking about the overview of general scientific topics that people commonly debate, which I hate to say that word, but unfortunately it's the reality of our world. They commonly debate a lot of different climate science facts. So I'm just trying to bring the science to the table. And I have a tornado genesis project that I am working on. So I'm trying to increase lead time for tornado warnings. So yeah, that's some up of my stuff.
Awesome. One of the people in the chat asked for the link to that series, if you wouldn't mind sharing it.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's do Erica next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erica Harris, and I'm a coastal and climate scientist who now lives in St. Petersburg, Florida, so I'm a long way from Oregon. I work in the private consulting industry, where I get hired to work with a lot of different sectors, including municipalities, seaports, airports, the military, industrial areas. You name it, I probably work with them. And the goal of this work is really to help them better understand the vulnerabilities and risks to their facilities and operations that are posed by climate change. And then on the flip side of that, to help them prepare a plan for adapting to these future hazards so that they can maintain their operations into the future.
Great. Let's do Jeff.
All right, there we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Burright. I graduated in 2005 with an English degree from Oregon State, and then I came back for a degree in marine resource management, which I graduated in 2017. For the last 4 years, I've worked for the Oregon Department of Energy in the Nuclear Safety Division. Mostly what I do is work on the Hanford cleanup. For those of you who are not aware, one of the largest nuclear waste cleanups in the world is just up the Columbia River in Eastern Washington. And my job specifically is to ride herd on the high-level waste tanks that are underground. There are 177 of them. They're about the size of basketball courts, each one. And they are actively corroding. And they are full of about 56 million gallons of radioactive waste. So I represent Oregon's interests in the cleanup and advocating for a complete cleanup in that regard. I'm also a regulator for the disposal of waste within the state of Oregon to make sure that radioactive waste is not being disposed here, which some of you may not know that fracking produces naturally occurring radioactive waste that has become a pretty big problem around the country lately. I'm also a duty officer in the event of a nuclear fuel related emergency, such as could happen. There is a nuclear plant up in Washington on the Hanford site. Yeah, so that's me.
Great, thank you. And then Michael.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael Kula. So alongside Jeff, I actually graduated from Oregon State in 2017 as well. Got my master's in atmospheric science, and after I graduated, I got a job up at DNV, which is up here. We have our office in Portland. Originally started off as a wind energy analyst, transitioned to solar, and been working in solar energy for the last couple of years. My job is essentially as a consultant. So if someone wants to build some solar farm, either out in the field or on rooftops, it's our job to determine, hey, what kind of production can you expect? What kind of risks are you undertaking? And kind of play the middleman between people who are looking to build projects and people who are looking to finance them. And yeah, we've been in the field and also doing some innovation and determining other different loss factors that could be affecting solar production. So that's my role at DNV.
Okay, and then my second introductory question is, how did you get from student to where you are now? What was that path like, just briefly? Like, what were those steps between where all these students are and how'd you get there? And let's go in the same order, just to keep it simple there.
Sure. So yeah, let's see. The first step after I graduated in December 2019. And then right afterwards, Oregon's legislative session was just getting started, and it was a short session. So I worked as a legislative assistant for the chair of the House Energy and Environment Committee. We were working on a carbon pricing bill that I had been following for a while at that point. This was in 2020. Then right after that session ended, it was March 2020. I'm sure I don't have to remind you all what happened in March of 2020, but not necessarily the best time to be looking for a next step. So afterwards, I eventually, through that legislative assistant position, I was on calls with this group called Climate Exchange. That's like a big nationwide network of people who are doing great climate work at the state level, but all across the country. And so I had an internship with them for 2 semesters, two periods of time. And then the first one focused on Oregon, the second one focused on Washington. From there, that's where I met Clean and Prosperous Washington. And, they didn't have work for me immediately, but I just stayed involved with them. And as we were passing the bill, they liked the work that I was able to do for them. And starting in September of 2021, they hired me on as a research associate. So kind of a windy path, but each next step prepared me for the one after that.
Great. Let's see.
I guess I'm next. I would say that really what got me from like school to my job was just applying. I applied everywhere I could. I talked to as many people as I knew. I had made a big effort to network while I was in college, which was, I think, very beneficial. And then actually this job I obtained through Handshake, which I thought was pretty kind of one of those oddball places because I was looking at a lot of the federal sector and the government sector. And then this just popped up and it was an ideal opportunity. And I'm kind of the yes girl. So I took it and ran off with it. So definitely use Handshake. It works.
I paid her to say that. Okay,
Yeah.
Erica was next.
So I got into my career primarily through my experience at Oregon State, actually. I was brought on as a graduate student assistant in the oceanography department, working with Dr. Peter Ruggiero, who's still there. And I was studying how changes in the climate can influence coastal hazards, the coastal hazards of erosion and flooding, and the effects that this can have on the vulnerability of shoreline features like beaches and dunes. And although this is directly related to my existing career, my path wasn't really a straight line from grad school directly into the private consulting industry where I am now. After finishing my master's degree, I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do or if I wanted to stay in the field of coastal hazards. And so for the next probably 2 years or so, I did a lot of exploring. And I worked on a variety of different jobs, including temporary positions as a coastal field scientist for the state of Oregon. I was a LIDAR data technician in Portland for a little while. I was a data scientist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in Boulder, Colorado. And I was even a ski bum in Idaho for a season. So even though I ended up in a job that was directly related to what I was studying at Oregon State, I'm really thankful for the opportunity that I had to kind of take some time off in those years right after I finished my degree in 2011, because it really gave me the opportunity to test some boundaries and think about what I liked and what I didn't like about jobs and kind of get some perspective before I arrived at more of a career level position like I am now.
So in the long ago, in 2005, I was nearing graduation as an English major, and I decided at the last minute that I didn't want to go to law school. I didn't want to go into the large amount of debt that would require. And that turned out to be a good idea because I would have graduated right in 2008 from law school. So having decided that my career path was not going to be my career path, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then a friend who I was working with at my college job, I worked in an office there on campus for a research group. She said, my uncle runs an environmental consulting firm out in Walla Walla. Would you like to meet him? And I said, that sounds great. What is environmental consulting? Had no idea really. And met them, had a good experience. It was probably another year before they had an opening, and started with them. Having that job, I started out as the person taking notes in important rooms. And from that, you learn about the culture of what it is in the kind of natural resource decision-making world. You learn how to be a good writer. You learn how, all of project management works, all those kinds of things. And so I got a lot of general experience, but also a lot of our work tended to be for nuclear waste cleanups around the country, just as kind of a coincidence of what the subject matter was. And so I got fluent in the language and the jargon and the concepts related to that, not thinking it was really going to go anywhere, but really enjoying my experience in the room with the different regulators who were trying to wield science toward making decisions. And I thought that sounded kind of cool. But with an English degree, I didn't think I could get there. Then my wife and I decided to leave it all behind for a few years. We went sailing and lived on our boat for a few years. And as I was coming back, I thought, well, how can I parlay my previous job experience with this experience of having been on the ocean and this desire to earn a seat at the table where people are using science to make decisions? And that led me to come back to Oregon State for grad school for the MRM program, Marine Resource Management, which had a really good blend of science and policy and human dimensions. And so came back for that, got some really great experience, got a lot more science cred under my belt, met some really awesome people, and got to research collaborative permitting processes in the marine renewable energy field. So wind, offshore wind, and wave energy. Right about the time I was graduating grad school, I wasn't even done with my master's thesis yet. I hadn't defended, and I just checked LinkedIn and saw that ODA, Oregon Department of Energy, was looking for somebody who could kind of blend the science with the human dimensions and just happen to know a lot about nuclear waste. And I thought, oh, well, they're looking for me. And it turned out that worked. And I had a boss who used to say that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. And I would say that my career path has been largely characterized by luck as I just swing from vine to vine of opportunities. So.
Yeah, so my career path was a little bit odd. So I graduated from undergrad in atmospheric sciences, and I always thought I was going to be a weatherman and do weather forecasting. And I was lucky enough to graduate when NOAA was under a hiring freeze. So I pivoted a little bit, did business school, decided I want to get back in the sciences, applied to OSU. And while at OSU, the way I got to DNV was just through networking. I was really fortunate that a member of our a group in grad school, her husband worked at DNV. And so he told me a lot about the company and the work culture, and it sounded like a place that interested me. And on top of that, Robert Allen, who I think is still working at OSU in the grad school, he had a connection at DNV as well. So I reached out to him and, had lunch with the guy, got to know the company a bit more, applied, and was persistent, would send emails to a couple folks I knew at the company outside of those I met through networking, and eventually landed a gig. And, originally I started off as just a wind energy analyst, and it was fine, but it wasn't necessarily anything that I envisioned myself doing for a long time. And an opportunity came about. They asked, hey, does anybody want to jump over to solar? So made the leap over to solar. And while I was there, I had a couple opportunities while folks were out to take on some leadership, opportunities. So it was jumping in meetings, representing my team, managing workflow, managing people, and worked my way up. And now I'm a team lead on here, managing 5 people on at DNV.
Perfect. I'd like to underscore what a lot of the panelists said about their paths weren't always all the way planned out and kind of windy. If that takes any pressure off some of you trying to make decisions, a lot of times it kind of gradually happens and things build on each other. And so often it's just, you happen to know somebody who does something. So not being afraid to reach out to companies and just ask, I'm really interested in what you do. I'd love to talk to you. I mean, that's okay to reach out and just talk to people. So we're going to turn it over to student questions. You can start submitting your questions in chat. I'll start with a question I saw in the main room. Somebody asked, they are in environmental sciences and they want to get into a career, but not so much the government path. What else should they consider? So that's one question I saw.
And I guess I'll just jump in on that one because I did answer that initially. So I know that when you're trying to get into the private sector, it may seem a little intimidating and you're kind of thinking, what place would I be able to actually do an environmental science job in? But a lot of different private sector companies actually have a high need for climate scientists, whether it's to address their carbon emissions or their carbon footprint. You'd be surprised. Like I've seen it through Amazon, Nike, just countless companies just within the area. Intel was one I saw a posting for. So my advice to you is to reach out to these companies, send them an email, say, hey, I'd like to do an informational interview. I'd like to see if there's maybe a way I could do a job shadow. This is what I'm interested in. Do you guys have any opportunities in this sector? A small email can go a long ways. I've done that a lot and you'd be surprised how far it's gotten me. So I highly recommend that you would take that approach to whoever that person is or anyone else with that question.
And I would add to that that LinkedIn is a really good resource for identifying somebody who works in a field that you want to be in or works for a company that you want to work for, and reaching out to them and asking them how they got into their position and just what is their background like and what's it like to work at the company that you're interested in or in the role that you're interested in. I think that at least I've found that people are very open and willing to talk with you about their experiences, and just making that initial connection with them, it can kind of get you through the first hoop you have to jump through of getting through HR to get an interview for these kind of positions.
Okay, a question we had that was a pre-submitted question was, what makes working in climate and energy rewarding?
I can take that one. So, a lot of the time, working in the climate space can get a little bit doom and gloom. A lot of people can, sort of look at the defeats and think we're not doing very much. But in my experience, at least, persistence has really paid off. Like the same bill that we were trying to pass in Oregon that didn't pass, I went up one state north, and in Washington, we did have it pass, and Oregon soon decided to emulate that sort of program. So it's rewarding to know that even during like the down times, you are making progress. This field especially, we're moving forwards, not backwards. It's just a matter of how quickly we're getting there. And the fact that that your work, when I'm judging through some economic report or trying to figure out what these data are telling me, at the end of the day, what the project is helping the entire planet. There is no more noble cause than that. So it's a good motivation to get you up in the morning and get on with your work.
That's a good answer. Okay, so someone asked about good places to search for GIS and remote sensing jobs or internships.
LinkedIn, definitely LinkedIn. That's just from my experience. I think that's probably going to be a big resource in general for a lot of your networking and job searches. Also looking Workday, Oregon, I think it's just go to the Oregon.gov website. And I know Workday is like one of their applications that they use for job searches. That's another place I would look at, and then USA Jobs.
There's some GIS positions in Handshake as well. And then a place in town that does a lot of GIS is NV5 Geospatial. So there's also GIS at consultancy. So basically all the places our panelists are working are also places that often will have a GIS type position available. So lots of places. We have a question, as an eCampus student that's currently in a semi-remote area, do you have any advice for ways to gain more experience or starting points to get experience? We have a lot of our students are eCampus students. So what if you're out in rural wherever and trying to get this career started? What would you recommend?
Well, it's a tough one to answer because the landscape of work is changing right now on how much remote work you can do versus the requirements to be somewhere in person. But there's more opportunity now to do things remotely than there ever has been. And beyond even just looking for jobs, there are lots of ways to be involved in different processes and to make your mark, to do something notable that you can put on a resume, to grow your voice, those kinds of things. But specifics are hard to prescribe.
I'm going to put go ahead. Go ahead, April.
Oh, sorry, just to weigh in on that too. I know like I'm a part of the American Meteorological Society for the Oregon chapter, and all of that's done via remote. And that's a great networking way for you to not have to really like necessarily go out there. But those individuals have always been able to kind of get you into like internships, at least in the Portland area. So I'd see if there's a local chapter in whatever discipline that you're focused on. If there's some sort of group or some sort of chapter that you can get involved in virtually and start networking with them, even just getting involved in like Facebook pages that are disciplined in your sector for your area, that can help you kind of network and start finding those possible remote internships.
I also added a resource which I commonly recommend to eCampus students. It's called BuzzFile. So it's basically an employer indexing service, and they have an environmental filter that you can look at. And so you can be like, I live in Indiana, and then I want to look for environmental jobs, and then it will sort them by Indiana and by size. And so you can figure out which employers are in your hometown or your county. So that's another good place to look. Okay, our next one, how would you start gaining experience to make yourself qualified for a career like one of yours? How do people get qualified for what you're doing? Oh, and the same, I don't know actually if that's the same person, just showed up as green. There's a similar question. What sorts of internships or other experiences helped you get your career? So those are, we're going to cluster those two. So what kinds of experiences, how did you get qualified?
Yeah, I can try and take that one. So when I was at Oregon State, I was involved in ASOSU, the student government, as the coordinator of environmental affairs. And I found that all the next steps in my career afterwards would really kind of draw on that first experience of like, you know, trying to get student resolutions passed. It's not, you know, the same thing by any means, but it is sort of like the version of legislative experience at the university level. And then that can translate to when you're applying for a job as a legislative assistant at the state level. And then once you get, you know, that position, you can go take that somewhere else. So it's sort of like, I'd say, recognizing the Oregon State, the broader community that you're in, and kind of seeing it as a microcosm of the real world, and what you can, you know, what you can get involved with at the university level here will be preparation and will show up as experience that you can put on a resume, that you can talk about in your cover letter for a job that's in a similar field out in the real world at a bigger scale than at university level. So that's what I would say.
I'll add a couple. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would also recommend kind of getting a well-rounded foundation about whatever it is that you're interested in. So for example, if you're at Oregon State, or when I was there, I took classes in a variety of different, from a variety of different perspectives, like marine coastal management, oceanography, geology, coastal engineering, and law, and just kind of tried to really understand these often competing interests that are in this very complex coastal environment that I was interested in working in. And so I think kind of taking that perspective could be good too.
We have a question which is pretty specific. So just in case anybody knows, has an inkling on this, trying to bridge psychology and conservation and maybe marine environment conservation. Anybody have a thought on that one?
I'll put in a plug for the Marine Resource Management program. That's kind of the home for that kind of stuff, where you blend the human and the technical. You know, it's often said that managing fisheries is managing people, and I would say that that is often true for many natural resource issues, including marine. And it's a good place, and there are many programs like it around the country. Well, I won't say many. Oregon State's one of the best.
That one's embedded in CEOS, that degree, and I can vouch for that program as being really good at preparing students for that kind of thing. Okay, next question. Looking at possible job applications, I find most entry-level positions require a few years of experience, even with a degree. How did you overcome this hurdle after graduation, especially if you can't afford to keep doing volunteer and internship work? Good question.
I will definitely take that one because I feel like I can offer some insight that might help. So especially I know in college, some of you are probably independent students. I was that student. And so I was the one that was working and basically going to school, going to work, doing my homework, repeat, and I had a few other life responsibilities on top of that. So it made it much harder. I got really passionate about one specific thing, and that was in tornado genesis, which I mentioned earlier. And I started a research project. And this actually started in 2014 before I was at OSU. And I would work on it and I'd have to take time off, work on it, take time off. I put that on my resume. I spoke at the National Weather Association. I actually just put in an application for it thinking I probably wasn't going to be able to present. They wanted me to present. So I went to Oklahoma and did that. I went to the undergraduate leadership workshop in Boulder, Colorado for a week and put that on my application. I did have my internship experience. All in all, I think it ended up being 6 months when everything was said and done. I did one internship like back in 2011, and I definitely put that on there. So I kind of took all my experiences in college and morphed them together on my resume. And I tried to highlight what somebody would actually want based on the job posting. So I've noticed I have probably about 50 copies of my resume, and there'll be little tweaks in every single one. That's just who I am and how I've applied for jobs. So that I think definitely played in my favor. And then when I put my resume on like Handshake or like on LinkedIn or something like that, I would make sure that I keep it kind of generalized, so it wasn't tailored towards anything, but it was tailored towards what I wanted to do. And that I think really helped me and got me the job that I got. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps you guys.
Looking good on paper is an art. And yeah, your years of working at X company is, that's one way you can tell your story. But really what you are trying to do is create and tell a story about yourself that people can connect with. And so it's not necessarily always about, I acquired these skills and I worked for X number of years at this place. It can be the things that you did, showing that you've taken responsibility for things or that you've taken an interest in something and carried it somewhere. And if along the way you can say, and by the way, I know how to use Excel, like that's a nice thing to be able to say. So.
Yeah, and when I was applying for my position, I found like the cover letter was a great way to kind of bring it all together and reinforce some of my soft skills as well. And, I was also a little bit lucky, but a little bit perseverance. I spoke to the woman that was leading my department at the time, sent an email, because the company I work at is quite large and my resume actually got lost in the process. So if I hadn't reached out, I don't know if I would have gotten the gig. So a little bit of luck, a little bit of perseverance, but yeah, I definitely recommend, have that resume and have that cover letter as good as you can get it.
And I would add that a lot of the things you're doing in school can count. So projects, you can fill them out on a resume just like you would a job. Presentations, are you out there taking soil and water samples? Are you building maps? I mean, these are all things that can be featured and showcased, and your coursework that's relevant and the skills that you're learning in class, those are all relevant. So a lot of people discount those and say they just don't have any experience. So bring in everything you do have and tell that story like Jeff was saying. I got an anonymous question that exploring science communication and science education or outreach. Do any of you have experience with this type of career path or advice for that kind of career path?
If no one else is going to jump in, I guess I'll just offer some thoughts that I have experience with it, but I don't know exactly how you design a career path around it. It sounds like April's kind of on that track by making it herself. What I find in my job now is that a lot of what I do is communicating science to people who have differing levels of familiarity with the topics we're talking about. And with nuclear waste in particular, people have widely varying perceptions of what risk is involved. And, I find myself often not getting down into the technical weeds with people, but trying to connect the technical concepts with things that are familiar to people. And so like I've done OMSI science pubs, for example, where you have to take the 10,000 year problem of nuclear waste and boil it down into, an entertaining hour and those kinds of things. But how how you craft that into a career. Someone help me. I don't know.
All right, Jeff, so you put me on the spot. Thanks. I guess, yeah, it's kind of, everybody's got their own style. I'm a goofball. I'm proud of being a goofball and a nerd. And so I kind of try to show that off. Initially, Facebook was kind of my first go-to place, and I was doing that in school. And so I'd make silly videos or do silly things. And then once I got into the real world, and obviously with COVID being more isolated from seeing people and seeing what's said behind the screen, I kind of decided that the best way to really communicate this stuff is to make it funny, make it interesting. One thing I saw, actually, I've been looking at TikTok more. I hate to admit it, honestly, but I have. There's this huge climate change, I guess, section on it. And so this one guy was asking people on the street, I think it was like in LA or something, like, why don't, what are things about climate science that are hard to understand? And a lot of people are saying, well, everything is in metric. They didn't say metric. They're like, they're in Celsius, everything's in Celsius, or everything's in meters. We don't understand that. So I'm like trying to get ideas of where people are really finding the issues and like trying to communicate that to people. And it is hard, but making things funny, interactive, and easy to talk about, or easy to, I guess, to understand is the key. Start with your friends. Start talking to those friends that don't necessarily understand climate science, those family members that, really want to learn, but just don't have maybe the background in it, and try to bring things down very simple. Use little tiny things like, oh, if you see that this is a flat surface, as sunlight hits on this, some of it's going to be absorbed and some of it's going to be reflected. Like things like that will really start to help give you the skill sets you need to be able to communicate these things and also teach others. So yeah.
Okay, so question on any ideas on how to create a career out of the intersection of the environment and food systems or nutrition? That's a pretty specific one. So if nothing comes to mind, we can move on to the next one.
There's cool stuff happening with algae these days. I don't know.
I think there's a lot of environmental practices, sustainable agriculture, things like that. And you can feel free to follow up with me, the person with that question. We can always brainstorm in a career advising appointment too. Okay, so how much research and development, product development are in your jobs?
There's quite a bit in my Tornadogenesis project because I created a microchip and got a patent on it. And so I'm the one who has to build it. So that is what I do along with everything else I do in my life. So basically, yeah, that 1/3, because I like to put things into thirds, that 1/3 is, mainly right now product development. With the chip shortage, it's been really challenging. I actually was applying for a grant through the National Science Foundation, had to put that off for a year just because one of my components that was originally $10 is now almost $90. And so that's not really going to be something we can work with. So, right now I'm kind of putting that on the side, but that is a big part of like 1/3 of my project. And if you have something specific you want to talk about, I'd be happy to help you out and provide you my resources. Just go ahead and connect to me on, OSU Connect, or you can, we have my contact information. I'll be sent out there and we can talk a little more.
I did a little bit of product development with the consulting firm back in the day. We had a client in Silicon Valley that was developing new types of big data appliances and that kind of thing, mostly project management work. And then right now I'm doing some, I guess I'd call it just basic research. There's a National Academy of Sciences study going on right now for Hanford, where they're essentially debating whether the tank waste should be turned into glass or could be turned into concrete. And if so, where should it be disposed? And they're balancing all these different things. And as a representative of Oregon and someone who is technical in nature, I'm participating in that study and kind of providing the outsiders context, kicking the tires on all the research that they are doing and providing my own perspective. And so there are some fun opportunities to engage on specific subjects that way.
We have a question. any advice for breaking into the environmental field? So this person was a business systems analyst before, but I see people who are like accountants wanting to break in, or doctors. So I'll just broaden that question. If you have a whole previous career, what do you do with that? How do you get into the environmental world?
I think you could look for baby steps of how to do it, how to take your experience from the past and bring it into the field that you want to be in. So for example, if you're a business systems analyst and you want to get into, like, the example that I can think of is the climate change world, there's a whole sector now that's focused on the business case for resilience. And so you can basically boil it down to why we should be adapting to climate change and why we should be taking this seriously and what is it going to cost if we don't do that. I think little things like that, I think, can that they're becoming growing fields, and there's a big interest in it.
Yeah, I would say, like I'm not going to the very same ideas. It's, find something that you're passionate about and that you're interested in, and find ways in which you can use like your soft skills to work in that. Like in my position, or, people that I worked with when I started as wind, like they weren't, atmospheric scientists. They were people that were good at numbers and good at math. There were accountants that just didn't like being accountants, but they're able to use their skills in different ways. And so, yeah, if you find something that you can translate your soft skills to work in a field you enjoy.
And I would add that sometimes it's baby steps. So in my career, I was in public relations, technology, PR, marketing, that kind of thing. And so I wanted to go into adult education after my master's degree in English. I did a bunch of teaching, but I think it was too big of a jump for employers. But so what I did is I came into Oregon State as a marketer and then scooched over to what I really wanted to do was work with students. So once you're in an organization, getting that foot in the door job, you're not locked into being a business systems analyst forever, but maybe you could be an analyst and then you can kind of scooch over to another position. That's very common to kind of move within your organization. So that's just one other thought. Okay, we're coming up to the end of our time. We might actually be able to end on time here, or we might stay a couple extra minutes if there's a couple questions we can't get to. So last questions, and then we'll wrap up here. So what is something that surprised you about the day-to-day job tasks that you weren't expecting as a student?
I saw that question. I was excited to take it because I was going to say one thing that surprised me pretty immediately when I started working out in the professional world, not being a student anymore, is that, and I don't know if this is applicable to everybody on our panel's careers, but at least in my experience, a lot of the work that I've had to do, it's been a little bit more ambiguous. Like, there's not really a clear sign of what the steps are. It's just an end goal. And sometimes that end goal doesn't have a clear deadline. So really in the real world, it was a lot less structured than I was used to in the university. And if you're somebody that has like that, deadlines are kind of what helps you get motivated to get something done. At least in my experience, the deadline is kind of a little wishy-washy, but you still need to, be productive and everything. So you need to get used to start setting your own deadlines and like being organized yourself, and that'll definitely help you with the transition out of college.
Okay. So thank you so much, panelists. Like I said, I'll share this recording with anybody who attended here, as well as the panelists' email addresses. If you just had a burning question you think of right after the panel, feel free to email our panelists and just pick their brain on those. Or like I said, there's a career advisor like me in each of the colleges. You can always make an appointment to have those "what do I want to do with my life" kind of conversations with us. So if everybody could give our panelists some love with their emojis and reactions, because they did amazing and I'm so appreciative. And thanks to the Alumni Center for organizing this and hosting it. And I'll let Des have the final word here.
Thanks everyone for coming again, and panelists, you were wonderful. Thank you for giving of your time and talent and coming back to the university, and hope you'll continue to stay in touch. And all of you future alumni, current students, hope you will also consider being an active participant as alumni once you're graduated as well. And just hope everybody has a great night. Thanks again for coming.
Thanks.